What's going on, everybody? Thanks for coming back and watching my channel. Thanks for allowing me to share my knowledge with you. I'm here to help you play better guitar and to make it as easy as I can to explain things so you have the easiest time learning. There's enough confusion out there. I just want to make things as simple as I can to help you out. I wish it was that way for me when I was coming up. So if I can make things easier for you, that is what I'm here to do. Let's get right into how inversions work, because this is all about inversions of chords. A standard chord uses the root note as the lowest note of that chord. We call that being in the bass. It doesn't have to actually be in the lowest section of the guitar to be considered in the bass. It just needs to be the lowest note of the progression you're playing. So even if you're playing way up here, the lowest note would still need to be the root note to be considered a standard chord. For example, let's look at basic G major. The root note of G is the lowest note that we strum. This is a regular G major chord. However, I'm going to move in for the camera so you can see. You won't see my ugly mug, but you'll see my fat pudgy fingers today. So if I move over to this G major chord at the 7th, 8th, and 9th frets, well, then the G note is on the 2nd string. And the lowest note we're going to be playing here is the B note that's at the 9th fret. That B. This B note is the lowest note because we're not going to play open strings that are not in the chord. So I'm not going to be hitting the A and E strings. I'm going to be hitting 4, 3, and 2. But the lowest note of this chord is this 3rd finger note right there, which is B, because G is down here. So this is an inverted G major chord of G, B, and D. But what kind of inversion is it, and how many inversions are there? Well, since B is the first note past the root of G, this is called a first inversion G major chord, because the lowest note is 1 away from the root. G, B, D. B is the first note away from the root. G, then B, and then the D. So if D was the lowest note of this chord, and D is 2 notes away from the G, G, B, D, well then D would be this. If D is the lowest note, if this was a G chord where D was the lowest, this would have been a second inversion chord, because the D is 2 away from the G. Since B is the lowest note and B is 1 note away from the G in the G chord, this is a first inversion G major chord. Let's look at this E minor chord that sits right underneath it. If we only strum 3 strings, then the E is the lowest note. So this is a standard E minor chord. However, if I move this E minor chord to the 12th fret, well, now we have E, we have B, and we have G. And G is here, as you can clearly see, even with one eye, should you have a glass one. You can still see that this G is the lowest of the 3 notes. So if you play this E minor in a book, in a chord, in a song, this is going to show up as E minor / G. Now, when you're looking at inverted chords on printed paper, they're going to have a slash with the note that is in the bass, or that lowest note, to the right of the slash. So this chord would be written as EM / G, letting you know that it is inverted with G as the lowest note of that chord. Let's look at another example. Here is that G major chord slid down to the F major chord. Now the A is the lowest note of this chord. So if this was a first inversion G, then simply moving it down to F, where F is now the root note, makes this a first inversion F chord, because the A note, FA, is the lowest note. The A note is the lowest. So if this was a first inversion chord, moving the shape down is still going to keep this a first inversion shape. Now you just have a first inversion F chord. Let's look at the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th strings. We have an A major chord at the 2nd fret, but let's move it somewhere where we actually would use it other than the 2nd fret. So this is B. Here's a C major chord, and here's the D that I played in another progression. So here's the D major, here is the C major. The 2nd, 3rd, and 4th strings are what we're looking at. So let's look at these 3 strings, 2, 3, and 4, and see if this is an inverted C major chord. Well, let's get right to the lowest note, the 4th string. This, if you know your fretboard or your octaves at all, this is a G. So we have an E, we have a C, and we have a G. G is the lowest note of this chord. C is in the middle. C, E, G. G is 2 from the C, folks, which makes this a second inversion C major chord. Again, because 2 away from the C. C to the E is 1, E to the G is 2. So that G note in the C chord is 2 letters away from the C in the notes of the chord. So C, E, G. G is 2 from the C. This is a second inversion C major chord, folks. Second inversion C major chord, because the note that is 2 away from the root is the lowest note, being the G. That's all it is to finding an inverted chord. Let's take an open chord. Here is D major, right? We play the open D, 3 strings. Now, if you play this chord as three strings, just the first, second, and third strings, you have an inverted chord. What chord do you have, folks? You already know? This is a second inversion D major. Why? Well, because the A note on the third string, which is the last note I'm playing, is the lowest note of this chord. The lowest note is the A. However, if you play it as 4 strings, with the D string being the lowest note, then it's a standard D major chord. D is the lowest note. Again, however, if you strike it as the 5th string first, and you put the A note first, well, then the A note is the lowest note of this chord. Now, we all know the chord goes D, F sharp, A. If you didn't know that's how it goes, you do now. D, F sharp, A. A is 2 from the D, folks. So if you strum this as a standard D minor chord, a D major chord that we see in all the songs, then this D major from the 5 string and below is a second inversion D chord, folks, because as you now know, A is 2 from the D. D, then F sharp, then A. So, this is a second inversion D major chord if you play it from the 5th string. It is a standard D major chord if you play it from the 4th string, and is again another second inversion if you play it from the 3rd string A. That is inversions, folks. And let's just go over. If you have a 7th chord, let's take A minor 7, A, C, E, G. If you find this A minor 7 chord with the G as the lowest note, then you would have a 3rd inversion chord, because you would have A, C, E, and G would be 4 from the root. A, C, E, G. So G being 4 from the A, we would have a 3rd inversion chord, because G is the 3rd letter from the root that would be the lowest. So when you have a 4-note chord, you end up having a 3rd inversion chord. So, to sum it all up, a triad which has 3 notes can have a 1st inversion chord or a 2nd inversion of that chord. When it's a 7th chord, you can have a 1st inversion, a 2nd inversion, or a 3rd inversion, because the 1st inversion is when the 1st note past the root is the lowest, which is really the 3rd. When the 2nd note from the root is the lowest, which would be the 5, that is a 2nd inversion. And when the 3rd note from the root is the lowest, which would be the 7th, that would be your 3rd inversion. If you have any questions, leave me a comment and I will explain it to you. I hope I did a decent job of explaining the inversions to you. That's all there is to them. There is nothing else. So go have some fun. I would suggest finding some chords and checking to see if they are inversions or not. If you have a chord book, go right to the chord, look at the chord, see what the lowest note is. You can simply make a low, just like this D chord, you can make this D chord be standard by strumming the root as the lowest, or you can just pick another string and it automatically makes it inverted. So that's inversions of chords, folks. When another note besides the root is the lowest note, you have an inversion. I hope this helps you guys understand chord theory better and makes you a better guitar player, because you can see what's going on your guitar and you now know more. Knowledge is power, folks. I'll see you in the next video.